For over half a century, Western powers and multinational corporations have relied on a brilliant, invisible weapon to strip Africa of its wealth. They simply convinced neighboring nations to fight each other for the right to be exploited, while the European Parliament, the African Union, and regional blocs broadcast a highly coordinated narrative that the Sahel is a collapsing, dangerous space. A completely different and far more threatening reality is taking shape on the ground. The international community is actively pushing a storyline of regional chaos to justify their geopolitical isolation tactics. But behind the dust of diplomatic posturing and the relentless headlines, something terrifying to the old neocolonial order has just been activated. It is not a new military offensive, and it is not a weapons purchase. It is a calculated, devastating economic counterstrike designed to permanently sever the chains of foreign extraction. To understand the magnitude of what is happening, you must first understand the mechanics of the race to the bottom. For decades, foreign mining giants have operated in West Africa using a classic divide and conquer strategy. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger each possess their own individual mining codes, their own tax regimes, and their own isolated ministries of finance. This geographic and bureaucratic fragmentation was the ultimate leverage for foreign capital. If the government in Bamako demanded higher royalties on its gold, the multinational corporation would simply threaten to move its heavy machinery and capital to Ouagadougou. If Niger demanded that its uranium be processed locally rather than shipped raw to Europe, foreign executives would smile, pack their briefcases, and tell Niamey they could find much better legal terms across the border. This perpetual bidding war meant that African states were constantly terrified of losing foreign investment. That very fear was used to extract massive concessions, long-term tax exemptions, and deeply unfair resource allocations. The nations of the Sahel were kept as mere price takers, forced to accept whatever crumbs were left after their mineral wealth was loaded onto cargo planes and ships. It was a perfect system of economic subjugation, cleverly disguised as free market foreign investment. But that entire system was fundamentally shattered between August 10th and August 13th in Ouagadougou. Under the rotating presidency of the Alliance of Sahel States, currently held by Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a profound structural shift occurred. This was not a ceremonial gathering for political grandstanding. It was an economic war room. The ministers in charge of energy and mines, alongside top-tier technical experts, legal minds, and the brain trust from all three nations, sat down to execute a highly specific written roadmap. Their objective was singular and revolutionary: the creation of a unified mining code and a common, impenetrable framework for the exploitation of all energy and mineral resources across the entire Sahel Confederation. The Alliance of Sahel States is undergoing a rapid mutation that foreign capitals are watching with absolute dread. What began out of sheer necessity as a mutual defense pact, a military shield forged to combat the non-state armed groups, that decades of foreign intervention conspicuously failed to eradicate, is now crystallizing into an economic superstate. By harmonizing their energy and mining policies, these three nations are fundamentally altering the balance of power on the continent. They are moving far beyond just securing their physical borders. They are securing the sovereignty of the soil beneath their feet. The sheer scale of what is buried under the Sahel makes this unification a global emergency for foreign extractors. We are looking at a region that houses some of the planet's most prolific gold producers and a uranium belt that has single-handedly powered European nuclear infrastructure for generations. When actors holding this massive weight of strategic resources stop competing against each other, they stop being victims of a rigged market. They are declaring that the era of playing African capitals against one another is over. For the first time in modern West African history, the raw ingredients of a superpower, military deterrence, and unyielding economic sovereignty are being fused together into a single, undeniable block. The architecture of this newly proposed unified mining code rests on four non-negotiable pillars of economic sovereignty. These are not merely bureaucratic adjustments, they are highly calibrated defense mechanisms designed to dismantle the neo-colonial extraction model. The first pillar is the absolute harmonization of fiscal regimes across the alliance. By standardizing the taxes and royalties that a foreign mining company must pay, the Sahel Confederation instantly eliminates the threat of capital flight. A multinational corporation can no longer march into a finance ministry and demand tax exemptions under the threat of moving their operations next door. The tax rate in Bamako will be the tax rate in Ouagadougou, and it will be the exact same tax rate in Niamey. The loophole of regional competition has been permanently closed. The second pillar enforces rigorous local content provisions. For generations, foreign operators have treated African nations as simple dirt quarries, extracting the raw earth while importing all their own technical staff, machinery, and supply chains. The new unified code demands that the jobs, the engineering contracts, the local supply lines, and most importantly, the processing of raw materials must remain in the hands of the Sahelian people. It is a direct mandate for domestic industrialization. The third pillar is a severe crackdown on the transfer of mining titles. In the past, foreign entities would secure a massive concession, only to flip that permit from one offshore shell company to another. This corporate shell game allowed them to evade tax obligations, abandon environmental cleanup duties, and disappear into the shadows of international finance. The Unified Code strips away this anonymity, locking investors into their legal and financial obligations. The fourth and perhaps most strategically brilliant pillar is the establishment of a collective dispute settlement mechanism. Historically, when an African nation dared to challenge a Western mining giant, that single government was dragged into international arbitration courts in Paris or Washington, where the legal and financial scales were heavily tipped against them. Moving forward, a company initiating a legal battle will not just be fighting an isolated nation. They will be facing the entire Alliance of Sahel States as a unified, impenetrable legal and economic bloc. If this sounds entirely unprecedented, it is only because the international media has largely ignored the groundwork that made it possible. This common code is not starting from zero. It is the definitive fusion of three massive national revolutions that have already rewritten the rules of the game. Look at what started in Mali in the year 2023. The government in Bamako introduced one of the most assertive pieces of mining legislation the African continent has ever seen. The Malian state now demands a free, non-dilutable 10% stake in every single mining project, securing priority dividends right off the top. Furthermore, the state retains the legal right to purchase an additional 20% within the first 2 years of commercial production while compelling foreign companies to sell another 5% to Malian private investors. This effectively means that domestic Malian interests can capture up to 35% of any major mining operation, a massive leap from the previous maximum of 20%. Royalties were hiked, and a special strategic reserve was placed over crucial elements like lithium and uranium. Through this aggressive renegotiation, Mali recovered over $1.2 billion from foreign operators who were forced to blink first in the standoff. Burkina Faso followed this exact trajectory in July of 2024. The Transitional Assembly unanimously passed a brand new mining code that elevated the state's free stake to 15%, with the right to acquire a paid stake of 30% on top of that. But Burkina Faso went a step further in curbing generational exploitation. The validity of large-scale mining permits was slashed from 20 years down to 10 years, preventing foreign entities from hoarding Burkinabe land for decades on stale, outdated terms. The era of tax and customs exemptions during the commercial exploitation phase was completely abolished. Then there is the ongoing high-stakes battle in the Republic of Niger. For 53 years, the French nuclear giant URANIUM controlled the uranium flow out of the Sahel, feeding the reactors that powered European cities. By Niger's own calculations, the foreign conglomerate walked away with over 86% of everything pulled from the historic Somaïr mine between 1971 and 2024. Niger finally said enough. In June of 2024, Niamey revoked the permit for the massive Imuraran deposit, which holds an estimated 200,000 tons of uranium. When the French operator tried to halt production at the historic Somaïr mine as a pressure tactic, the Nigerian government outright nationalized it. They proved that the local workforce, who already made up 99% of the staff on the ground, could run the facilities at full capacity without foreign overlords dictating their every move. The Unified Mining Code of the Alliance of Sahel States is simply these three national victories forged into a single continental shield. To truly grasp the gravity of this geopolitical earthquake, you have to look past the grand declarations in Ouagadougou and stand in the abrasive red dust of Arlit, deep in the Agadez region of northern Niger. For over half a century, this isolated desert town has been the beating heart of European energy security. Imagine the life of a geological engineer. Let us call him Amadou. Amadou was born in the shadow of the massive open-pit uranium mines. He grew up watching heavy convoys tear up the local roads, hauling away yellow-cake uranium by the thousands of tons. He studied hard, earned his engineering degree, and returned to work at the historic Somaïr mine. But every evening, when Amadou returned to his neighborhood, he faced a crushing paradox. He spent his days extracting the very radioactive material that guaranteed 24-hour, uninterrupted electricity to millions of homes and high-speed trains stretching from Paris to Lyon. Yet, his own town routinely suffered through rolling blackouts. The neon lights of foreign capitals blazed brightly on the back of his labor, while his community breathed in radioactive dust and struggled for basic infrastructure. Amadou was not just a worker. He was a silent witness to an extraction regime that defies modern comprehension. Over his career, he saw the internal ledgers. He knew the numbers that foreign capitals tried so desperately to keep out of the global press. For 53 years, from 1971 to 2024, the foreign conglomerate operating the mine walked away with over 86% of everything that was pulled from the Nigerian soil. Think about that staggering figure. 86% of the wealth generated by the sweat of local laborers and the sacrifice of local land was funneled directly into offshore accounts and foreign national reserves. Amadou and his fellow Nigerian workers were handed the remaining fraction, expected to be grateful for the low-wage jobs provided by their supposed benefactors. This was not a partnership. It was a mathematically perfected system of generational theft, justified by contracts written in boardrooms thousands of miles away, completely disconnected from the reality of the Sahel. The breaking point arrived when the geopolitical winds shifted heavily in Niamey, as the Nigerian government began demanding fairer terms and eventually revoked massive permits like the one for the Imararan deposit. The foreign operator deployed its ultimate weapon, the threat of total systemic collapse. They requested to halt production at Somaïr, assuming that without their top-tier foreign executives and proprietary oversight, the entire operation would grind to a miserable halt. They expected Amadou and his peers to panic, to beg for the foreign experts to stay and save the local economy. But the foreign executives severely miscalculated the quiet competence that had been building on the ground for decades. When the foreign management attempted to paralyze the facility, the Nigerian government refused to grant the shutdown order. Instead, they took full national control. This was the moment Amadou and the local workforce stepped into the crucible of history. 99% of the staff on the ground were already Nigerian. They were the ones driving the massive haul trucks, maintaining the complex milling equipment, and monitoring the chemical leaching processes. When the foreign supervisors evacuated, the plant did not shut down. It did not collapse. It did not miss a single operational beat. Under the leadership of local engineers like Amadou, the Somaïr mine continued to operate at 100% capacity. They proved, in real time, that the myth of African dependency was nothing more than a psychological weapon designed to maintain foreign dominance. For Amadou, the unification of the mining code across the Alliance of Sahel States is not just a high-level diplomatic victory. It is the ultimate vindication of his life's work. He knows firsthand that taking control of a mine is only the first step. The real danger comes afterward, when the ousted corporations try to blockade the country and starve it into submission. That is exactly why the Unified Mining Code being drafted in Ouagadougou is a matter of national survival. When Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger stand together to dictate the terms of their own resources, they are building a legal and economic wall around the victories achieved by workers like Amadou. They are ensuring that the devastating 86% extraction model can never be replicated on Sahelian soil again. The local workers at Arlit shattered the illusion that foreign masters were indispensable. Now, the AES is scaling that exact same defiance across an entire region, turning the grit, technical mastery, and silent endurance of local engineers into an impregnable fortress of economic sovereignty. The euphoria of reclaiming a national asset like the Somaïr mine is immediately sobered by the brutal reality of the global financial architecture. When a single African nation attempts to alter the extraction dynamic, the old neo-colonial order does not surrender. It simply shifts the battlefield from the physical mine to the international courts. Right now, the Republic of Niger is enduring a textbook financial siege. Since the political shifts of 2023, Nigerian workers have successfully produced over 1,800 tons of uranium concentrate. This stockpile is valued at approximately $318 million on the open market, yet Niamey cannot sell a single ounce of it. In a coordinated legal strike, foreign operators rushed to the World Bank's International Investment Dispute Tribunals and secured binding injunctions. These legal maneuvers effectively barred Niger from transferring or selling its own sovereign wealth, while arbitration proceedings drag on for years. The sheer absurdity of the situation is staggering. Roughly 1,000 tons of this highly valuable uranium, worth $240 million, is currently sitting immobilized under heavy guard at a military air base at the Niamey airport. It is trapped within Niger's own borders, held hostage by the invisible chains of international commercial law. Furthermore, before the new government could fully secure its assets, an existing stockpile of about 800 tons of Nigerian uranium that had been warehoused in France was quietly liquidated by the foreign operators throughout 2023 and 2024. Niger watched its wealth vanish into European ledgers, utterly powerless to stop the transaction. This is the exact geopolitical stranglehold that makes the unified mining code of the Alliance of Sahel States an absolute necessity. A single landlocked nation can be blockaded in court, but an entire regional bloc operating under a unified legal defense mechanism forces multinational corporations into a completely different calculus. However, recognizing the strategic brilliance of the Ouagadougou roadmap also requires an unblinking, objective look at the severe challenges threatening its survival. Declaring economic sovereignty on paper is vastly different from enforcing it in one of the most volatile regions on the planet. The Alliance of Sahel States faces extreme existential hurdles that the international community is betting will cause the bloc to fracture. First is the acute security crisis. The region remains deeply destabilized by the presence of non-state armed groups, mining convoys, infrastructure projects, and extraction sites are highly vulnerable targets. A unified tax code means very little if the logistics networks required to transport heavy machinery and refined minerals are constantly disrupted by violence. Secondly, the Confederation is tying its economic future to the incredibly volatile global commodities market. While gold prices are currently experiencing historic highs, elements like lithium and uranium are subject to wild, unpredictable price swings driven by geopolitical tensions and technological shifts in battery manufacturing. A regional budget calculated on today's premium prices could face a catastrophic shortfall tomorrow. Finally, there is the sheer bureaucratic friction of fusing three distinct national economies. Harmonizing a final common level of taxation across Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger requires a level of administrative discipline, transparency, and anti-corruption oversight that has historically eluded West African governments. If the tax rate is set too aggressively, it could genuinely freeze capital deployment. If it is burdened by administrative incompetence, the new code will simply replace foreign extraction with domestic stagnation. Despite these daunting challenges, the actions of the Alliance of Sahel States are accelerating a massive continent-wide awakening that reaches far beyond the borders of West Africa. The doctrine of resource sovereignty is actively spreading, dismantling the traditional export models that have defined African economies since independence. The AES is no longer an isolated anomaly in this fight. Look at the southern cone of the continent. Since 2023, the government of Namibia has outright banned the export of unprocessed critical minerals. If a foreign entity wants access to Namibian lithium or rare earth metals, they are now legally required to build the processing infrastructure on Namibian soil. Zimbabwe has taken similarly aggressive measures, banning the export of raw lithium ore entirely. As a direct result of this firm stance, Zimbabwe recently inaugurated Africa's first fully operational lithium sulfate plant in Goramanzi, forcing international battery manufacturers to climb the value chain locally rather than stripping the raw earth and fleeing. Even the Democratic Republic of Congo, the undisputed giant of global mineral wealth, has initiated severe crackdowns on undeclared mineral exports and is moving to exert tighter state control over processed concentrates. The era of the bidding war is rapidly approaching its end because the fundamental leverage has shifted. The raw materials required for the fourth industrial revolution, the critical components for global energy transitions and advanced military technology, are overwhelmingly buried beneath African soil. By standing as a unified economic fortress, the AES is aggressively signaling to the rest of the continent that when you stop competing for the privilege of being exploited, you finally possess the power to dictate the future of the global economy. The ultimate trajectory of the Alliance of Sahel States is now coming into sharp focus, revealing a geopolitical reality that foreign capitals are entirely unprepared to handle. What the international community aggressively dismissed as a temporary military pact, a desperate, fragile coalition formed merely to combat regional insurgencies, is actively morphing into a full-scale economic superstate. When a regional bloc successfully combines unified military deterrence with unyielding collective economic power, they possess the exact raw ingredients required to rewrite global trade logic. By refusing to let their gold, lithium, and uranium be weaponized against each other, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are stepping out of the shadows as perpetual price takers and are preparing to operate globally as undeniable price setters. To truly appreciate the magnitude of this unified mining code, you only need to look at the immense resource tragedies unfolding in the surrounding regions. Consider the Democratic Republic of Congo and Nigeria. Both nations possess every single demographic, geographic, and geological requirement to be undisputed, independent global superpowers. Yet, they remain severely paralyzed by the very extraction models the Sahel Confederation is actively attempting to destroy. In Nigeria, aggressive, illegal mining operations actively finance the precise insecurity that tears at the fabric of the nation, with immense wealth vanishing across porous borders entirely undeclared. The political class has largely allowed the nation to be eaten from the inside by foreign and complicit local interests. The DRC, despite housing the critical minerals required to drive the entire global technological revolution, is still fighting basic administrative battles just to track what actually leaves its sovereign territory. These massive states function as isolated giants, easily picked apart by multinational corporations who thrive in the chaos. The Sahel, traditionally and mockingly viewed by the West as the impoverished, landlocked periphery of the continent, is right now constructing the exact working counterexample that those massive African giants desperately need to study. The immediate battle moving forward is a brutal race against time. The Alliance of Sahel States urgently needs time to execute this unified economic roadmap. They require a steady operational window to fully implement the common tax brackets, to ruthlessly enforce the local content laws across their combined borders, and to weather the inevitable legal, financial, and diplomatic sieges orchestrated by ousted foreign corporations. And time is exactly what the coordinated international narrative is designed to deny them. When regional economic blocs and European parliaments loudly label the Sahel a collapsing, irredeemable security threat, they are purposefully setting the geopolitical stage for intense isolation and potential intervention. Give the dog a bad name so you can hang it. That is the oldest colonial trick in the playbook, and it is currently being deployed against Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey with maximum intensity. But a sovereign bloc that speaks with a single legal voice, that negotiates the wealth of its soil as one impenetrable entity, cannot simply be isolated, starved, or bought off by foreign diplomats. The fight for the mineral wealth of the Sahel is no longer just a regional dispute. It is the absolute front line of a much larger, continent-wide war for the unconditional sovereignty of the African continent. This is about dictating who actually gets to finance the future of the global economy. As this economic revolution faces down international arbitration courts, frozen assets, financial blockades, and a deeply hostile global press, we will remain right here on the front line, decoding every single maneuver. If you stand for a geopolitical reality where Africa's immense natural wealth is finally utilized to build African prosperity rather than subsidizing European empires, then you belong in this community. Hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications, not simply to follow a channel, but to actively help us break the absolute monopoly of the Western media narrative. Every time you engage with and share this analysis, you directly help push the authentic, unfiltered voice of the motherland out to the global diaspora. Stand alongside us as we meticulously document the rise of a self-reliant, unapologetic continent. Thank you for offering your time, your deep attention, and your intellect to this critical conversation. Stay sharp, stay vigilant, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.